Bowers. I'm in business development here at Cardinal. Thank you so much for coming and welcome to our humble abode. This afternoon and morning, we'll be hearing from Daniel Dejean, who is the North American DTC print and creative manager. He works with Sappy. He used to work with Gutenberg. The side note if you wanted to throw in there. And he is on the road for over 200 days out of the year. So, we're really thrilled to have him here today. And in his spare time, I guess he enjoys spending time with his family and pets. And so without, and also in the back, if you could, after the seminar, we have some really quick surveys. No long answer, just fill in a bubble. Don't be intimidated, but if you could please just let us know what you thought. We're continually making improvements here so that we can give you the best seminars in the world. Here's Daniel Dejean.
Thank you. Didn't that feel odd? How are you? Good. So I should warn you in advance, we're probably going to have a really good time in the lab and enjoy ourselves. Tough. Yeah, that's nice. Welcome. So glad you could take the time. We're going to be talking about quick response and codes on augmented reality. I'm going to show you some samples. We're going to be talking about things. My background, so that you know, is as an art director, creative director, graphic designer, print production manager. Please, I'm going to be moving at a relatively quick pace out of respect for your time, but I can't invite you more normally. Please, let's make this conversation. I mean, if you have questions, you want to stop me, I'm going to show you some case studies. I've been working on QR codes for probably 6-7 years, so quite a while. You'll see as we relate it to where we are here. And on augmented reality probably for 4. I've got a bunch of really cool stuff to show you. So with that, let's just go ahead and start. How many of you are, how many of you are familiar with QR codes? Everybody, right? I mean, good. So I'm not going to, it started at summer camp when it was young kind of thing, stuff like this. I do want to really sort of emphasize something, and you'll hear me sort of say this again and again. We are so far behind in the use of QR codes in North America, it's embarrassing. That's all I can tell you. We are so far behind. I mean, QR codes started in 1994 as an industrial, it was really sort of a 2D barcode. Became ubiquitous on the Pacific Rim by the late 90s, totally ubiquitous in Europe, basically early 2000s. It was being used everywhere. They got really excited about it. We did not get involved in QR codes. We really don't see them being used well or properly, probably until late 2009. The analogy that I use, we missed all of that sort of history and all of the technological evolution. And one of the analogies that I use is, it's sort of like in certain countries, their first phone is actually a cell phone. So when they see a movie, of somebody going up to the wall and going, hello, or grabbing something off the TV, they go like, what's that? And you say it's a telephone. They go, no, this is a phone. Does that make sense? So sometimes you'll see things and you'll go like, what were they doing? And it's like, well, those are barcodes. You're like, no, they're not. They're like this. And that's only because we got into it so late. Anyway, I'm going to give you some data, some production data first, just so that we sort of get a sense of it, and just so that you know, I tour North America, so I've worked with one of the major carriers, communication carriers here in the States, and then also same thing up in Canada, so I'll give you sort of both. Key point, the position detection patterns, critical. Okay, because you all know how they work, right? You have an app, you turn it on, you you turn on the app, it goes through your camera. The camera now sort of zooms in. It is now turned into a scanner. Is that okay? What you need to understand is that these help your phone to triangulate. First of all, it helps it to understand that it's supposed to act like a scanner. It is also what triggers your Wi-Fi to turn on, so that when you do the scan, it understands to look at the code, capture it, and then convert it into a Wi-Fi signal to get to the microsite. Now, the interesting thing is you can spin this thing around as much as you want. It doesn't have to be in this position. I'm going to show you some absolutely beautiful QR codes in a second that have been designed in Japan and in Europe. And the first thing that you'll notice is this is not sacrosanct, okay? To that point, the walls themselves are not sacrosanct. You can bust out of them, you can use them in fun ways. I just finished doing one with one of the telecommunications companies, and they were doing a logo and an icon, and we got it just to break right out, and it looked great, you know, it was really sassy, as in terms of aesthetics. So the majority of your information is really going to reside here. Depending on the length of the URL that you're trying to use, it may start to spill in to the inside. But the first thing you'll realize is the center doesn't matter. In fact, I'll make this comment to you now. At this late point in the game, not putting a logo or an icon or some sort of pictorial in here just doesn't make sense. Absolutely, you should all absolutely make sure. And at the end of this, by the way, certainly take notes, but I'm going to give you my email address, and you can just contact me, and I'll send you this deck gladly. Okay. But the point of it is, use this for branding. This is what the most important thing. Use this to build brand. Use this to reinforce brand. The idea of having, like for us, we have 20 different codes that we use. They all go to 20 different microsites. Everyone has got its own icon or its own pictogram that really identifies what department it's sending you to or what microsite it's sending you to. Does that make sense? So I can't reinforce that strongly enough. You have to have a 30% contrast ratio. So it can be a colored ink on a colored paper, no problem. You can put this on a screen background, no problem, as long as you've got a 30% contrast ratio. The one thing you cannot do is you cannot drop this into a photo. If you're going to drop it into the photo, you really do need to have this quiet zone around it so that the scanner sort of can quickly make the difference between what is photo information, what is the QR information. Let's talk about size, because this has been a real issue for all of us. Recommended an inch by an inch. Can you make it smaller? Yeah, you can, okay? As the quality of phones get better, as the quality of the lens gets better, as the quality of the resolution gets higher, I've seen it down to about 3/4 of an inch by 3/4 of an inch. But I've got to tell you, sincerely, first of all, test constantly. When we create a QR code, and I'll show you some QR code generators, when we create a QR code, we pump it off right out of our desktop printer, we put it on copier paper, and then the first thing that I do is I've got a series of phones on my own, but I'll take it around the office. The one thing you want to try to do is this, and I'll sort of give you sort of the caveats. No problem with the iOS, the iPhone operating system, particularly the 4 series, late 3 series, no problem. No problem with the Android. In fact, Android really was great because they got into it so late that they came in with a great camera from the very beginning. Where it will always be problematic, unfortunately, is with the BlackBerry. Unfortunate. They never really made a camera that, in their mind, was supposed to take the place of a Nikon or, a Canon, which really was always the goal of the other companies. They always wanted you to have something that was a multi-purpose device. So the problem is with BlackBerry, and particularly the older versions and the older operating system, problematic, quite frankly. You have the operating system doesn't work well, the lens and the resolution on them. Now, I will share with you that the BlackBerries that have been created in the last year, they've actually tried to up their game to be able to be competitive with the other, because that was one of the big conflicts and complaints with BlackBerry users. It's like, you know, I can type like crazy, and it's great for texting and emailing, whatever, but it, you know, all these other functions really are sort of poor. So they're trying to do a better job of it. The other thing, and this is more from a production perspective, everybody cool with .game? Okay, paper surface is going to be important. Because if you understand .game, when you do this and you put out a QR code, typically you're going to put it out onto a brochure or a piece of collateral. It's going to be on nice paper, relatively speaking. You put it in a magazine, you're on a coded stock, you know, number 3 graded coded stock. Where you have problems is if you take that same code and you try to put it into a newspaper or into an uncoded stock with a lot of typography. The porosity of the paper is going to have .game, and unfortunately what's going to happen is you're going to spread the pixels and it's going to get harder to read. Does that make sense? So a lot of times we'll hear, worked great in our brochure and it worked great in some of the other pieces. We put it out and we got very, very poor response rates when we put it in the newspaper. And my response typically is, it's not that you didn't get poor response rates. I am sure that there were a lot of people trying, it just didn't connect. Okay? What's the easiest way of being able to deal with it? Just make it larger. I mean, quite frankly, almost in the same ground rule with the idea, if you've got, you know, a 15% .game, you know, make it 15% larger to compensate, or 15 to 20% larger to compensate. Should be no problem at all. Please.
On readability, what
Yeah.
about the use of QR codes off of monitors,
Yeah.
flat screens, all that? Is there any issues with
Yeah,
that?
there is. You know, the one thing that we find is, like in some cases, what we find is like screens like this that are very, very reflective because it's made for a projector. There are times where when you go up and you try to use your phone, and if it's sending out the wave, it comes back and it's not reading clearly because it's so reflective. In some cases, it's just a question of stepping back. In the same way, sometimes you'll hold it up to a monitor because it's fluorescing. It's quite bright. It's too bright for the camera itself. But if you step back and you're literally increasing the contrast ratio, you shouldn't have any problem. Yeah. The other part of it is it's sort of obvious. You know, the thing is, your camera has to have enough time to be able to go, look at it, focus, scan. So, I mean, there's like this running joke for us whenever we see like a QR code on a billboard on the highway. We're like, really? How's that going to happen? Unless you pull the car over, you're never going to have enough time for the camera to actually work properly. And people will always say, well, you know, it was a great idea, we put it up there. And invariably you hear the same thing. Invariably you hear, we got a very, very poor, you know, response rate. And it's like, no, you didn't get a poor response rate. People probably were trying, but by the time they got their phone out, it was like gone. You know, you have to think about it in the same way, and this is part of my sort of, you know, best practices. In the same way, you actually have to, and I know this sounds obvious, but you have to make sure that you're in a place where you can get Wi-Fi reception. Okay? Why am I saying that? Because I've been in subway tunnels where they've got posters, and they're wonderful, and they've got a QR code. And then I think, sure, why not? You know, I'll scan anything. I pull out my phone, and it's like, my scanner works, everything's going great, it captures it, and then I'm waiting for the signal, I'm waiting for the signal, I'm waiting for the signal. Train shows up, or the subway shows up, and I go, well, that was a waste, you know, how frustrating. The other part that you'll find that's going to be very important also is